Hey everyone, welcome to this video where I'm going to continue the conversation from week 11's positioning to talk about the actual positioning portion. In a previous video I talked about floats. This time I want to talk about positioning, specifically static, relative, and absolute positioning, and I'm also going to talk about stacking order. So because I'm going to continue where I left off with week 11, I'm going to go ahead and open my HTML, my CSS, and my preview pane. Now, positioning an element is a really great way to specify the location of an element anywhere on the page, and we can use pixel precision to make that happen. Our textbook uses the term viewport, and you've heard me use that repeatedly. I'm referring to the browser window. The viewport is the space that visually displays on our page. So to position an element on the page, we use the position property. The first one I'm going to cover is static positioning. Now, after that first paragraph in our main element, we're going to add an extra image, and we're going to target that one image with an ID. So notice that our new image inherited the style of the other image, so therefore it's also floating on that right-hand side. We can fix that by adding a style for this image to give it a width, and then we're going to remove the floating behavior by specifying float none. This doesn't stop anything else from floating the way that it should. It only specifies that this one particular item is not going to be floating. We'll give it a width of 20%, and we'll put a border around it to make it easier to see. That's better. Now, by default, when the element is in the normal flow, the position is considered static. We could provide that property value pair of position static, but it won't change anything since the element is already in the normal flow. If it were not in the normal flow, then we would be able to use position static to overwrite some other behavior that's happening. But for right now, it's already static, so we don't need to worry about it. So let's move on to the other one, which is relative positioning. Relative positioning moves the element relative to wherever its original start was in the flow. That just means it's relative to itself. So the space it would have occupied is preserved and continues to influence the layout of its surrounding elements. Let's change that position of static to position of relative to show what I'm referring to. Now, it's not going to change anything by itself because it's already in its original position. We can, however, offset that by using offset properties of top, bottom, right, and left. So with this, it's a little counterintuitive, but if we want to specify an offset property on the left-hand side, we're actually going to be moving the element towards the right. And if we were to use bottom, we'll be moving that element up. Let's look at an example where we use an offset on the left and the top. So that left offset moved our element over to the right just a little bit, and the top pushed it down just a little bit. Now with relative positioning, the original space in that document is preserved and overlapping can occur, as we're seeing in this example. Our paragraphs didn't change their position at all. All we did was shift the position of our image. If I move my viewport around, watch what happens. Our image grows as it should because we set a relative size on it of 20%, but it's still going to continue to be offset from its original position. Let's put that back. So the last positioning one is the absolute positioning. Now this completely removes elements from the normal flow and puts them in position relative to its initial containing block, which is established by the viewport, with some minor exceptions. The space that they would have taken is eliminated completely, and they have no influence on whatever the layout is of the surrounding elements. Let's give that a shot. I'm going to comment out my position relative and put in position absolute. Now when I add some offset properties on the top and the left, this time the offset properties moves the element from the containing element, not from its original position. So it moved 5em from the top and 5em from the left. Watch what happens when I resize my window. It stays absolutely 5em from the top and 5em from the left. Let's add a bigger number to make it more obvious. With 25em, I'm pushing it down or away from the top by 25em. Now if I change the left one to, let's say, 35M, I'm going to end up shoving it all the way over to that pineapple with the sunglasses. So that's how position works with static, relative, and absolute. The last thing I want to cover in this video is stacking order. So by default, we've learned that elements stack one after another based on how they appear in our source code. But now we've seen that overlapping can happen when we change how elements are positioned. The property z-index can change how elements are stacked. It can take a positive or a negative number. If I were to add a z-index to my pineapple slices, I could push it or hide it. By using that negative number, it slides it to the bottom of the stack, and now the paragraphs and the pineapple is on top. Now the z-index does not work on elements that are statically positioned elements, as in the default positioning of all elements. But you can play around with this and try some different things. And if you're not sure, is that really there? Did that pineapple slices image really stay? I can comment out my pineapple with the sunglasses. And I can change the z-index so that that image is not hiding behind the main element, from -1 to 1. Now it's sitting on top. So relative, absolute, and stacking order are some pretty complex topics. Even some of the more experienced web developers can get confused. Mastery for this comes with lots and lots of practice. Play around with different things and see what happens. Every time that you make a change, make sure you're asking yourself, what do I expect to have happen? And if it happens, ask yourself why. And if it doesn't happen, ask yourself why. That's the best way to sort of break down where things are changing and how they're changing, and to get a better feel for how these work with each other. So when it comes to using any positioning or floating, my best recommendation is to take it super slow. Add in one behavior at a time, and then check that what's happening is what you're expecting to have happen. If you make too many changes at one time, it's going to be hard to track down where things go wrong. If you make one change and it doesn't give you the expected result, that's when you can stop and review what happened and what you wanted to have happen. So if you have any questions on any of this content, please don't hesitate to ask.